The ion storm bore down on the Valdorous plains with the fury of a celestial tempest, and Colton Weatherby was driving directly into its onslaught. His weathered transport shuddered against the electromagnetic gale, its stabilizers engaged in a futile struggle against gusts strong enough to capsize a freight vessel. Warning lights pulsed across the dashboard in a trio of alarming hues, none signifying anything positive. "Should have opted for the canyon pass," he grumbled, peering through the windshield at torrents of ionized rain that transformed the darkness into a disorienting, flickering inferno. Every droplet striking the hull erupted in a blue spark, rendering the night akin to the galaxy's most chaotic dance club. But no, Colton. You're already behind schedule. Colton, Widow Bertram's biosynthesizer requires that coupling tonight, or her harvest will perish. Colton, you utter fool. He'd been berating himself for the past 3 hours, a coping mechanism to fill the void and distract from the date circled in crimson on his kitchen calendar back home. 26 standard days from now. That was the day the Valdorous Sector Judicial Authority would decree whether he would spend the next 8 years incarcerated in the Kettering Orbital Penitentiary, or if he would return home to witness his son Finn's 10th birthday. 8 years. That's ample time for Finn to complete his primary education, for his voice to deepen, for him to surpass his father in height, and, most agonizingly, for him to forget the sound of Colton's laughter. It was enough time for everything that truly mattered to slip away, as ephemeral as water through clasped fingers. The accusation itself was ludicrous, which only intensified its cruelty. Colton Weatherby, a fourth-generation moisture farmer on a world whose primary exports were grain, remorse, and the occasional lost traveler who strayed from the Carina bypass. Colton Weatherby, ostensibly the mastermind behind a 300,000-credit smuggling ring, illicitly moving weaponry through the Kessel Agricultural Inspection Corridor. Gareth Montlaire had stood in that mahogany-paneled office, hands clasped behind his back as if posing for a formal portrait, and addressed the investigators with his chillingly placid gray eyes. "It pains me to speak ill of a neighbor," he had stated, each syllable laced with a practiced, reluctant sorrow. "But the manifest codes directly link to Weatherby's distribution permit. The payment records show transfers to accounts under his control. I've exhausted all avenues to find an alternative explanation, but the data is irrefutable." Data, Colton was certain, that Montlaire himself had meticulously manufactured. Montlaire Agricultural Holdings had pursued his family's land for 2 generations. The inheritance his grandfather had begun, his father had shed blood for, and Colton had vowed to pass on to Finn. 120 hectares of prime moisture farming territory, situated directly atop the sector's most extensive subterranean aquifer. Unable to acquire it through legitimate means, Montlaire had devised an alternative strategy for possession. A lightning strike, close enough to make Colton taste the metallic tang of copper, silenced his hover hauler's navigational system with a pathetic wheeze. He was navigating blind now, relying solely on his own senses and the intermittent flashes to illuminate the path ahead. "Excellent," he declared to the empty cabin. "This is precisely as it should be. Everything is perfectly fine." Then, emerging from the gloom without preamble, a sleek crimson skimmer materialized, canted precariously on the shoulder of the thoroughfare, its distress beacons flickering feebly against the storm's relentless assault. An ostentatious craft, that vessel, the kind that commanded a price exceeding the total valuation of his entire farm. The sort equipped with heated seating, genuine upholstery, and no doubt, a compact unit for chilling celebratory beverages. A craft entirely out of place on the agricultural frontier during an ion storm. And beside it, barely discernible through the chaotic downpour of charged particles, stood a solitary figure. Colton's foot instinctively moved towards the accelerator. "Keep going," a voice of weariness and fear whispered from the depths of his mind. "You don't have time for this. You have a coupling to deliver. You have a son awaiting your return. You have 26 days until your life as you know it concludes, and you cannot afford any further delays." But his mother's voice, a resonant echo from the past, proved more compelling. It always had, even 5 years after the fever had claimed her. As a child, she would grasp his chin firmly, compelling him to meet her gaze and declare, "A person's true worth isn't measured under clear skies, Colton. It's revealed in the heart of the storm." He pulled his vehicle over. The instant he opened the door, the rain struck him with physical force, each droplet carrying a sufficient electrical charge to cause his skin to tingle. His long silver hair, already escaping its restraint, whipped around his face as he trudged toward the solitary figure. He kept his hands visible, moving with deliberate slowness. A lone woman stranded on a deserted road during a deadly tempest. He understood how this situation might appear. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice strained against the wind's mournful cry. "Are you quite all right?" She turned, and even through the curtain of electrified precipitation, Colton felt his breath catch in his throat. She was not human. Her skin possessed the deep, lustrous hue of forest moss, smooth and faintly luminous under the lightning's glare. Her long, dark hair, sodden and limp, cascaded past her shoulders, framing a countenance whose features were strikingly akin to humanity, yet possessed an ethereal refinement. Higher cheekbones, larger eyes that radiated a startling violet blue even in the dimness, and elegantly tapered ears that swept back from her temples. She was clad in a tailored white garment that seemed to emanate its own soft luminescence, with circular blue nodes pulsing at her shoulders and torso, like a visible manifestation of a heartbeat. In her green-skinned hands she clutched an implement, gripping it with the tension of someone holding a weapon, her posture conveying a profound sense of defensive exhaustion. Colton halted approximately 5 meters away, rain streaming down his face, his worn leather jacket already saturated. "Easy now," he reassured her. "I'm not seeking trouble. I simply observed you were stranded and thought you might require assistance." Those piercing violet blue eyes scrutinized him with an intensity that made him feel as though she were perusing his life story directly from his soul. Finally, a subtle shift in her stance occurred. Not quite a relaxation, but a decision being made. "The ship's propulsion converter has malfunctioned," she stated, her voice measured and controlled, with an accent he couldn't place. "The surge from the storm overwhelmed both the primary and secondary systems simultaneously. My communication array is also inoperable." "A regrettable predicament," Colton replied, gesturing towards her craft. "May I inspect it? I'm not a certified mechanic, but I've kept machinery operational in this region for 20 years. Ion storms are rather our specialty." Another prolonged pause ensued, marked by that unsettling analytical gaze. "That would be acceptable." He moved past her toward the vessel, and while she did not recoil, neither did she turn her back to him. A prudent individual. The Crimson Skimmer's engine compartment was already ajar, and Colton leaned over the housing as rain hammered his back. The propulsion converter was a complex piece of machinery, the kind of high-end civilian technology that bore a substantial price tag. However, beneath its polished exterior and intricate chrome accents, the fundamental principles remained consistent with the devices he had been servicing since he was old enough to grip a wrench. "Here lies your issue," he announced after a few minutes, pointing to a scorched junction box. "Your surge protector failed, likely a manufacturing defect. I've encountered this before with the Thornwell series. The resultant surge incinerated your main converter, but the auxiliary unit appears to be intact." He withdrew a multi-tool from his jacket pocket and commenced work. "If I can bypass the damaged component and reroute power through the secondary system, you should have sufficient propulsion to reach a facility equipped for proper repairs. You believe you can accomplish this under these conditions?" "Ma'am," Colton responded, "I once rebuilt an entire harvester motivator assembly during a dust cyclone because my wheat was on the verge of withering on the stalk. This situation is practically a leisurely respite by comparison." Was that a hint of amusement in her expression? It was difficult to discern through her alien features, the persistent rain, and the sting of charged precipitation in his own eyes. He continued his work, his fingers moving with the practiced assurance of someone who had dedicated a lifetime to coaxing reluctant machinery back to life. "You are a farmer," she stated, not as a question. "4th generation on this world, primarily involved in moisture farming." "The height of glamour," he grunted as a stubborn bolt finally yielded. "Though currently, I'm moonlighting as a delivery driver for a neighbor. Her biosynthesizer is malfunctioning, and if she doesn't receive this coupling tonight, she'll lose her entire barley crop. And yet, you stopped." "It would have been a poor reflection of my character as a human being not to." The words escaped before he could consciously formulate them, an automatic response much like breathing. his mother's voice, speaking through him once more. "Besides," he added, "out here on the frontier, we look after one another. It's the only way any of us manage to survive." He worked in silence for a few more minutes, the storm raging around them as if the cosmos were intent on making a statement. When he finally connected the last lead and stepped back, wiping rain from his eyes with a sodden sleeve, the woman remained observing him with that same discerning intensity. "Try it now." She slid into the pilot's seat and activated the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, then settled into a functional hum. Not the smooth purr it likely possessed when new, but a determined growl that would suffice for her journey. "It should hold for approximately 200 kilometers, Colton advised, leaning against the ship's hull. "There's a service station at the Brookfield Junction. Inform them Colton sent you. They'll provide a fair assessment." She stepped back out into the rain, facing him. The storm was beginning to abate, the lightning less frequent, the wind subsiding from actively hostile to merely unpleasant. "I have a form of compensation," she announced, reaching for something inside the vessel. "That's not necessary. I insist." "Ma'am," Colton held up a hand. "I stopped because it was the principled thing to do, not an expectation of extracting payment from a stranded traveler. Reserve your credits for the repair bill. That converter replacement will likely be quite costly." Her violet blue eyes widened slightly. "Surprise," he mused. Perhaps she wasn't accustomed to individuals declining monetary reward. The sort of woman who piloted such a craft likely encountered few farmers who wouldn't eagerly accept a cash offer. "Then at least tell me your name," she requested, "so I may express my gratitude to the correct individual." "Fair enough," he agreed, extending his hand, water dripping from his fingerless gloves. "Colton Weatherby. And you're most welcome." She took his hand. Her skin felt cool and remarkably smooth, a texture unlike anything he had previously encountered. "I am Silith Farendel." "Safe travels, Silith Farendel." He released her hand and stepped back. "And perhaps next time consult the weather forecasts before venturing into an ion storm." "Perhaps I shall," she replied. Was that a genuine smile gracing her features this time? "Perhaps I shall." He was halfway back to his own vehicle when her voice cut through the diminishing storm. "Mr. Weatherby," he turned. "There are few who would stop on a night such as this. Even fewer who would refuse payment." She paused, as if carefully weighing her subsequent words. "In my experience," she continued, "such individuals are exceedingly rare." Before he could offer a response, she had re-entered her ship. The crimson skimmer ascended with elegant grace, its damaged systems notwithstanding, and vanished into the turbulent sky, its navigation lights eventually blending with the distant stars. Colton climbed back into his hoverhauler, allowing the water dripping from him to soak into seats already too worn to be significantly affected, and resumed his journey to Widow Bertram's farm, the crucial coupling in his possession. 26 days, he thought, as the road unspooled before him. 26 days until everything concludes. Yet a peculiar warmth bloomed in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite articulate, something that bordered on hope, a sentiment he knew was utterly foolish, a luxury he could ill afford. He never gave another thought to the green-skinned woman until the precise moment he entered the courtroom and found her seated behind the judicial bench, adorned in the formal regalia of a sector arbiter, her violet blue eyes meeting his across a room that suddenly felt devoid of air. The Valdres Sector Courthouse presented a curious architectural fusion of frontier practicality and governmental pretense. Its design featured stark, clean lines and recycled construction materials, embellished with intricately carved wooden panels sourced from timber that did not originate on this planet. Colton occupied the defendant's table, attired in his sole respectable suit, a borrowed garment from Thomas Vega, his court-appointed legal counsel. His own work clothes were designed for the rigors of farming, not for the systematic dismantling of a man's life. Finn had desperately wanted to attend, had pleaded with the particular fervor of a 9-year-old who grasped just enough of the gravity of the situation to be thoroughly terrified. But Colton had been resolute. "You stay with Widow Bertram," he had instructed, kneeling to meet his son's earnest gaze. "You attend school, you complete your chores, and when I return home—" He had to pause, clearing his throat before continuing. "When I return home, we will celebrate. Does that sound like a plan?" Finn had offered no verbal reply, merely wrapping his arms around Colton's neck and clinging with a palpable fear of letting go. The preceding 26 days had constituted a unique form of torment. Sleepless nights were spent cataloging his regrets. His days were a monotonous routine, performing life's motions while feeling as though he had already ceased to exist. His consultations with Thomas invariably concluded with the same somber prognosis. "The evidence is heavily weighted against us, Colton. I believe your assertion of innocence, but proving it presents a formidable challenge." And now, here he was, observing the prosecutor meticulously arranging his documents with the serene satisfaction of a man who knew he had already secured victory, awaiting the judge who would pronounce his ruin. "All rise for the Honorable Arbiter Silith Farrendell of the Galactic Judicial Coalition, presiding." Colton's legs responded automatically, propelling him to a standing position, his mind still struggling to process the pronouncement. Farrendell. The same name as she entered through the chamber doors. Her verdant skin was instantly recognizable, even beneath the somber black robes of her office, her dark hair elegantly coiffed, her violet blue eyes scanning the courtroom with the practiced authority of one accustomed to holding destinies in her hands. For a fleeting fraction of a second, her gaze met his. Recognition flared across her alien features, followed by a flicker of surprise. Swiftly suppressed, it was replaced by an impenetrable facade of professionalism as she proceeded to the bench without faltering, settled into her seat, and commenced the proceedings as if no unusual event had transpired. But Colton's heart pounded with such ferocity that he could feel the vibration in his teeth. The woman from the storm, the stranger whose vessel he had repaired in the downpour, was present. She was his judge. She knew who he was, and he had absolutely no conception of the implications of this knowledge. "The sector proceeds with the case of Region versus Weatherby," announced the bailiff. "Charges of contraband trafficking, conspiracy to evade customs inspection, and criminal enterprise operation in the first degree." The prosecutor, a man with a gaunt countenance named Aldrich Felon, rose with the fluid confidence of someone who had never experienced a courtroom defeat. "Your Honor, the prosecution will conclusively demonstrate that the defendant, Colton Weatherby, orchestrated a sophisticated smuggling network, utilizing his agricultural distribution permit as a clandestine cover. We possess manifest records, financial transaction logs, and testimony from Mr. Gareth Montlair, whose own enterprise was nearly ensnared before the true perpetrator was identified." Colton glanced across the room to where Montlair sat in the gallery, impeccably dressed in the attire of a prosperous businessman, his expression carefully composed to convey reluctant civic duty. Their eyes met. Montlair offered a faint, knowing smile. Thomas Vega stood, adjusting his spectacles with a hand that trembled slightly. "Your Honor, the defense will contend that this evidence has been deliberately fabricated to destroy an innocent man's life. Mr. Weatherby has no prior criminal record, no associations with smuggling operations, and no discernible motive beyond a farm that a wealthy neighbor covets." "These are grave accusations, Mr. Vega." Arbiter Farrendell's voice was calm and measured, betraying no hint of emotion. "I trust you possess more than mere conjecture to substantiate your claims." "We are in the process of obtaining forensic analysis of the digital records, Your Honor," Thomas stated. "Prosecutor Phelan," Aldrich's voice dripped with condescension, "the defense has had ample time to prepare. The records are maintained by Montlair Agricultural Holdings." Thomas interjected, "Our requests for access have been met with systematic delays and obstruction." Arbiter Farrendell's eyes narrowed perceptibly. Colton could not ascertain whether he was merely imagining an intensification of her focus or projecting his own desperate hope. "The court will address discovery issues in due course," she declared. "Prosecutor Felon, please present your case." What ensued was 3 hours of methodical devastation. Phelan summoned witness after witness. Shipping company clerks identified Colton's distribution codes on suspicious manifests. Banking officials traced payments through accounts linked to his farm's operational systems. A customs inspector recounted flagging unusual traffic patterns, only to be overruled by someone utilizing credentials that traced back to Colton's permit. Each piece of evidence slotted into place with the chilling precision of a meticulously designed puzzle. Colton watched his life disintegrate under an avalanche of forgeries and fabrications so expertly crafted, so utterly convincing, that even he began to question whether he might have orchestrated it all in his sleep. Tomas objected whenever possible, challenging inconsistencies as they arose, but it felt akin to attempting to stem a tidal wave with a teaspoon. The evidence was simply too comprehensive, too interconnected, too flawless. During a brief recess, Colton leaned towards his lawyer. "This is absurd. These records, a significant portion of them are from dates when I was attending sector agricultural conferences. There are witnesses who can corroborate my presence." "I am aware," Thomas replied quietly. "However, witnesses require corroboration, and the digital timestamps on these records have been validated by 3 independent certification authorities. We are contending with phantom evidence, Colton. So, what is our recourse?" Thomas did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I have submitted a formal request for a forensic audit of the original source files. If Montlaire fabricated these records, there might be residual traces, metadata discrepancies, edit logs that deviate from the established timeline." "And will the court grant such an audit?" "Under normal circumstances, no. It is a costly and invasive procedure, one that judges typically avoid unless presented with compelling justification." Thomas paused. "However, this particular judge, she is Farrandell. Is that significant?" "The Farrandell lineage is renowned throughout the Coalition for their absolute incorruptibility. Their entire species appears to possess a biological imperative towards fairness. It is why they are frequently selected for judicial appointments across the galaxy. If any individual is likely to order a forensic audit predicated solely on the pursuit of truth, it would be one of them." Colton recalled the violet blue eyes meeting his across the courtroom. Recognition. Did she remember the storm? Did she recall the farmer who had mended her vessel and steadfastly refused compensation? And even if she did, what tangible difference could it possibly make? Court reconvened. More evidence was presented, more witnesses were called. Montlaire himself took the stand, performing his role with the practiced ease of a seasoned actor, lamenting his shock and profound disappointment upon discovering that his neighbor, a man he had sought to assist and guide, had been exploiting legitimate agricultural channels for illicit purposes. "In a way, I blame myself," Montlaire stated, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. "I was aware of the Weatherby farm's financial difficulties. I had offered to purchase it to provide Colton with a fresh start elsewhere. Perhaps if I had been more insistent—" Colton's hands clenched tightly beneath the table. 8 years. 8 years separated from Finn because this man coveted his water rights. "Mr. Vega," Arbiter Farrandell inquired when Montlaire's testimony concluded, "do you have any questions for this witness?" Thomas rose, approaching Montlaire with the caution of a man circling a venomous reptile. "Just a few, Your Honor. Mr. Montlaire, you have testified that you uncovered evidence of Mr. Weatherby's alleged criminal activities during a routine audit of shipping manifests. Is that correct?" "That is correct." "And when did you conduct this audit?" "Approximately 7 months ago." 7 months, Thomas repeated, nodding slowly. "And during those 7 months you have not once directly investigated the servers where these records originate. My technical personnel handled the verification." "That was not my inquiry, Mr. Montlaire. Have you personally examined the original source files?" Montlaire's smooth demeanor faltered for a fleeting instant. "I fail to see its relevance. The records have been authenticated. Authenticated by certification bodies that reviewed duplicates, not the original documents." "Your Honor," Thomas turned towards the judiciary, "the defense formally requests a court-mandated forensic examination of the Montlaire Agricultural Holdings shipping record servers, specifically the sections pertaining to the manifests connected to these accusations." Prosecutor Phelan leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is an outrageous overreach. The evidence has been certified. The defense is merely attempting to prolong this process." "The defense is striving to establish the truth," Thomas interjected. "Something I would imagine the prosecution would embrace, unless the prosecution has cause to dread what such an examination might expose." "Sufficient." Arbiter Farrell's voice sliced through the discourse like a sharp blade. Both legal representatives fell silent instantaneously. She remained perfectly still behind her bench, her extraterrestrial features inscrutable, those deep violet eyes fixed on a distant point. Colton realized he was holding his breath. "The evidence presented by the prosecution is substantial and, on its surface, convincing," she stated finally. "However, the court has observed certain discrepancies. timestamps that align with almost too much precision, record sequences that connect with an excessive neatness, the kind of flawlessness that, in this court's experience, suggests either extraordinary criminal ingenuity. Her gaze shifted to Colton, scrutinizing him for a prolonged interval or exceptional fabrication. She leaned forward slightly. This court exists not to secure convictions, but to uphold justice. The distinction is significant, Mr. Phelan. It is profoundly significant. She straightened. The defense's petition for a forensic audit is approved. The court will adjourn for 10 standard days to allow for a thorough examination of the original source records. All parties will reconvene at that time. Her gavel struck with a sound that reverberated through the chamber like a gunshot. Colton's legs faltered. He dropped heavily to the floor, barely registering Thomas's hand on his shoulder. The prosecutor's furious, hushed discussion with Montlaire, the bailiff calling for decorum. 10 days. He had 10 more days. And across the courtroom, for merely a fraction of a second, Arbiter Silith Farrendel's eyes met his. She nodded almost imperceptibly, and then she vanished, receding into her chambers with the same serene authority she had displayed throughout. Silith Farrendel closed the door to her private sanctuary and leaned against it, her hands trembling. 23 years on the bench, 23 years of maintaining the impartiality that was both her sacred vow and her species' inherent disposition. 23 years of never, ever allowing personal acquaintance with a defendant to sway her judgment. And now this. Colton Weatherby, the human who had halted amidst an ion storm to assist a stranger, who had repaired her vessel with rain streaming down his weathered face, who had declined compensation with a tone suggesting wounded pride, who had regarded her with eyes that held not a flicker of the calculating self-interest she perceived in so many beings across countless courtrooms. The instant she had seen his designation on the case file, her ceramic mug had shattered on her office floor. She should have recused herself without delay. The ethical directives were explicit. Personal engagement with the accused, regardless of its brevity, mandated immediate withdrawal to prevent even the semblance of partiality. But she had perused the file, every detail, the evidence that connected with excessive neatness. The complainant, whose enterprise had sought to acquire the defendant's property for 3 generations. The public defender's desperate motions for forensic analysis, repeatedly denied by magistrates unwilling to endure the inconvenience. If she withdrew, this case would be assigned to Arbiter Vernal Grace. Grace possessed a 91% conviction rate. Grace had never ordered a forensic audit during his entire tenure. Grace considered expediency to be of greater importance than what he termed theoretical verity. Grace would have Colton Weatherby sentenced within a week. Silith pressed her fingers to her temples. Among her people, there existed a concept known as Fareth Vel, the juncture where the path of justice and the path of regulations diverge so profoundly that one must select which to pursue. It was regarded as the ultimate trial a Farrendeli arbiter could confront. She had either failed that trial or triumphed. She honestly could no longer discern. In that singular encounter beside a rain-lashed roadway, Colton Weatherby had revealed to her his true essence. Exhausted, apprehensive, contending with forces beyond his command, and still pausing to aid a stranger, still offering compassion, when he had every justification to hoard any remaining reserves of his strength. That was not a smuggler. That was not a criminal. That was a man whose fundamental character was etched in the act of extending his hand when he had nothing to gain and everything to forfeit. She had bent 12 ethical precepts to authorize that forensic audit. She would bend 12 more if it became necessary. The days crept by like wounded creatures. Colton performed the routines of existence, tending to the livestock, maintaining the moisture collectors, assisting Finn with his scholastic assignments, but his consciousness remained elsewhere, circling the same questions like a vessel caught in orbit. Did she recall him? Was that the reason she had ordered the audit? Or was he imbuing coincidence with significance, perceiving salvation where there was merely a magistrate fulfilling her duty? Finn sensed the change. Children always do. "Dad," he stated one evening, looking up from the miniature spacecraft he was assembling, "you're thinking too audibly again. It's preventing me from concentrating." Colton smiled despite the circumstances. "Apologies, my boy. My mind is occupied." "Regarding court?" "Yes, concerning court." Finn fell silent for a moment, carefully positioning a diminutive engine component with his fingers. When he resumed speaking, his voice was subdued. Widow Bertram asserts that judges are equitable. She claims they assist honorable individuals in discovering truth. That is their presumed function? Yes. Are you an honorable individual, Dad? The query struck Colton with physical force. He traversed the room and knelt beside his son, encompassing those small hands within his own. I endeavor to be, Finn, every single day. I strive to embody the kind of man my mother would have esteemed. Sometimes I fall short. Everyone falters, but I persist. Finn scrutinized him with eyes far too mature for his 9 years. Then the judge will comprehend. She will perceive it, correct? Honorable people are distinguishable from dishonorable people, from the mouths of children. I sincerely hope so, my boy. Colton embraced his son, feeling slender arms encircle his neck. I truly hope so. On the 8th day, Tomas telephoned. They've located it. His voice quivered with barely suppressed elation. Colton, they have discovered everything. The metadata indicates the records were generated 18 months ago, but the edit logs reveal they were actually entered into the system just 7 months prior, precisely when Montlaire claims to have discovered them. There are template fragments within the concealed data layers. Colton, whoever perpetrated this, utilized a prefabricated forgery kit and neglected to thoroughly erase their tracks. Colton sat down heavily. You're suggesting I'm suggesting Gareth Montlaire fabricated every piece of evidence against you and we can substantiate it. The courtroom was thronged for the reconvening. News had circulated that something significant had transpired in the Weatherby case. Something momentous. Reporters lingered near the entrances with recording devices. Farmers from across the sector filled the gallery, individuals who knew Colton, who had labored alongside him, who had never credited the accusations. Montlaire occupied his usual position, but his placid self-assurance had fractured. He repeatedly cast glances towards the exits, towards his legal counsel, towards the portal through which Arbiter Farrandell would enter. All rise. She entered with the same composed authority, taking her seat behind the bench without acknowledging any of the assembled observers. But Colton observed her eyes scan the room, and he saw them pause for a brief instant on the throng of supporters who had convened to witness whatever was about to unfold. The court has received and reviewed the outcomes of the forensic audit, she commenced, her voice carrying effortlessly through the silent chamber. The findings are quite revealing. She turned towards Prosecutor Felon, who resembled a man witnessing his career disintegrate in slow motion. Mr. Felon, are you cognizant that the evidence submitted by your office was created utilizing fabricated timestamps? That the manifest records were generated 7 months ago and retrospectively dated to create the illusion of historical illicit activity? That the payment trails were assembled from templates readily available through illicit document forgery networks? Phelan's mouth opened and closed. No sound emerged. The court has also ascertained that Mr. Gareth Montlaire, Arbiter Farrandell's gaze shifted to where Montlaire sat frozen, is the registered proprietor of 3 shell corporations directly implicated in the fabrication process. Corporations that were established specifically to manufacture incriminating evidence against the defendant. The courtroom erupted. Shouts, gasps, the rapid flash of recording devices. The bailiff called for order, but it was akin to attempting to halt a tidal wave. Arbiter Farrandell permitted the pandemonium to persist for precisely 5 seconds. Then she raised her gavel. The solitary strike silenced everyone. Based upon the findings of this forensic audit, all charges against Colton Weatherby are dismissed with prejudice. Her voice was a blend of ice and fire. Furthermore, this court refers the matter of Gareth Montlaire to the sector attorney's office with a strong recommendation for prosecution on charges of forgery, fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and criminal misuse of legal proceedings. Her gavel fell again. Court is adjourned. The clamor returned. Cheers now, not confusion. Thomas was embracing Colton, or Colton was embracing Thomas. It was difficult to ascertain. Farmers he had known his entire life were pressing forward to clap his shoulder, to clasp his hand. Someone was weeping. It might have been him. But through it all, his gaze consistently returned to the bench. Arbiter Farrandell was gathering her documents, conversing quietly with the bailiff, preparing to retreat to her chambers, the epitome of judicial propriety. But just before she turned away, for a mere fraction of a heartbeat, her eyes met his across the crowded courtroom. This time, she smiled, A small, private expression. Just for him. And then she was gone. A period of 2 months elapsed like a healing injury, slow, yet undeniable. Montlaire's trial was in progress, a spectacular downfall that had become the primary diversion across 3 sectors. His exorbitant legal representatives had abandoned him one by one as the evidence mounted, exposing not only the setup of Colton, but also a network of deceit and corruption extending back decades. He was facing a minimum of 15 years, possibly 20. The water rights remained with the Weatherby farm. The moisture collectors hummed peacefully. Finn returned to his studies and ceased experiencing nightmares about his father's disappearance. Life, against all expectations, continued. Colton thought of her constantly. The judge, Silith Farrendell. He replayed that moment in the storm repeatedly. Her caution, her measured tone, the way she had regarded him when he declined compensation. He recalled her visage behind the bench, professionally impassive, revealing nothing. She had jeopardized her career for him. He was certain of it now. A Farrendelli arbiter ordering a forensic audit based on anomalies she had perceived. That audit had cost the judicial system hundreds of thousands of credits. Without her personal conviction that something was amiss, it would never have transpired. She had discerned something in him that night in the rain, something she had determined was worth defending. He desired to express his gratitude, needed to thank her. But how does one approach a galactic arbiter to convey thanks for potentially contravening every regulation on the books to preserve one's existence? The answer arrived, as answers sometimes do, from an unforeseen source. Dad? Finn came running in from the mail collection point, brandishing a physical envelope, a rarity worthy of remark. There's a letter for you with a peculiar seal. Colton accepted it, frowning at the embossed insignia. Galactic Judicial Coalition Official Correspondence. His hands were trembling as he opened it. Inside was a formal notification. Arbiter Silith Farrendell had concluded her rotational assignment in the Valderus sector and would be departing for reassignment in 15 standard days. However, as a matter of record finalization, she was required to conduct closing interviews with key individuals in any cases where judicial intervention had resulted in significant resolutions. The letter requested Colton's presence at the courthouse for such an interview. The request was signed in flowing script. S. Farrell. Beneath the formal wording, almost imperceptible unless one was actively searching, was a handwritten addition in smaller lettering. The coffee at the courthouse is dreadful. The cafe 2 blocks north serves something almost palatable, merely an observation. Colton read it 3 times to confirm he was not hallucinating. Then he smiled. The cafe was named The Wandering Star, a designation that proved accurate when Colton spotted it. The entire establishment was styled to resemble the interior of a starship, with tables shaped like navigation consoles and walls displaying shifting vistas of renowned nebulae. The coffee was, as promised, nearly tolerable. She was waiting at a corner table dressed in civilian attire for the first time since the storm. Not the customary white ensemble, but something understated, elegant, refined. Her dark hair cautiously cascaded around her shoulders. Divested of her official vestments, she appeared younger, more approachable, more captivating, though Colton endeavored not to dwell on that thought too overtly. Mr. Weatherby, she gestured to the seat opposite her. Thank you for attending. Arbiter Farrendell. He sat, acutely conscious of his every gesture, though I am uncertain whether I ought to be expressing gratitude to you or vice versa. Both, perhaps. Her deep violet eyes held a warmth he did not recall from the courtroom. Or neither. I have been contemplating that evening with considerable frequency, as have I. They sat in silence for a moment, the sort of silence that felt replete rather than hollow. I should have recused myself from your case, she stated finally. The instant I saw your designation, I recognized that our prior interaction, however brief, had established a conflict of interest that any ethical review board would have flagged. But you did not. No. She clasped her green-skinned hands around her coffee cup. I perused your file, I observed the evidence, and I knew in the very core of my being, as my species possesses such intuition, that something was profoundly amiss. The pieces aligned with excessive perfection. Genuine crimes are chaotic. Genuine criminals commit errors. This was architectural. Someone had constructed an edifice designed to crush you. Manant Lair. Yes. But more than that, I read about your life, your family's legacy on that land, the son you were raising alone, and I recalled the man who had stopped amidst an ion storm to assist a stranger, who had been thoroughly drenched repairing a propulsion converter, who had declined payment with an intonation bordering on insult. She met his gaze. That man did not operate a smuggling enterprise, hence you initiated the audit. I contravened every regulation I was bound to uphold. Her voice was low, but firm. Had anyone meticulously scrutinized my reasoning? Had anyone questioned why this particular arbiter was so insistent on forensic validation? I would have forfeited my position, perhaps faced charges myself. Why? The question escaped before Colton could restrain it. Why risk all that for someone you encountered only once in the rain? She was silent for a considerable interval. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed. Softer, more personal. On my homeworld, we have a concept, Ferreth. It denotes the moment when adherence to protocol would result in injustice, and achieving justice would necessitate violating protocol. Every Farandeli arbiter is instructed to dread that moment, to implore that we never confront it, because it compels us to answer the most arduous question. What do we truly serve? The system or the truth? She looked at him, and something in her expression caused his heart to behave erratically. When I observed you that night, exhausted, apprehensive, 26 days from losing everything, and you still paused, still offered assistance, still refused to accept anything for yourself, I perceived what you were, not in documentation, not in evidence, but in your actions, in your choices, in the manner you treated a stranger when no one was observing. She paused. That is when I understood what truth signifies. Not the veracity of documents and records, the authenticity of who an individual is. Colton felt a subtle alteration within his chest, a portal opening, light flooding through. You saved my life, he stated. You saved mine first. Her smile was unexpected, transforming her alien features into something radiant. I was stranded in an ion storm, remember? My vessel was defunct, my communication systems were inoperable, and I was approximately 4 hours from succumbing to hypothermia. If you had not stopped, anyone would have stopped. No, Mr. Weatherby, they would not have. I have journeyed to 47 worlds in my professional capacity. I have witnessed the typical behavior of most beings when confronted with the inconvenient suffering of a stranger. They avert their gaze. They rationalize that it is not their obligation. They continue on their way. Her eyes held his. You did not. The silence stretched once more. But it was warm now, comfortable. I am uncertain of what transpires next, Colton admitted. In 15 days, you are departing for a new assignment. I am a farmer on a remote planetary outpost. We originate from different species, distinct cultures, entirely disparate backgrounds. Yes, she concurred, but I find myself unconcerned with all of that to the extent I likely ought to be. Nor am I. She laughed, an actual laugh, melodious and surprised and genuine. You recognize the awkwardness, naturally, a former defendant and the judge who ruled in his favor, the sheer professional impropriety. The case is concluded. Montlaire is incarcerated. There is no impropriety in two individuals sharing coffee. And if it evolves into something beyond coffee, Colton reached across the table. His hand, weathered and calloused from a lifetime of frontier labor, covered hers. Then I suppose we shall navigate it together. She did not withdraw her hand. Finn, as it transpired, was enthusiastically supportive of the developing situation. She has green skin, he announced to Colton after their initial official repast together. Official in the sense that Silith had visited the farmhouse and had to feign enjoyment of Colton's culinary efforts, which were marginally superior to his proficiency in spacecraft repair, but not by a significant margin. That's incredibly cool. Can she alter her coloration like a chameleon? No, my boy. It does not function in that manner. Can she read thoughts? No. Can she emit luminescence in the dark? I actually am not certain about that one. Silith, overhearing from the kitchen where she was assisting with dishwashing, called back. Slight bioluminescence under low-light conditions. Nothing dramatic. Finn's eyes widened considerably. You can glow very faintly. That's the most remarkable thing I've ever heard. He turned to Colton with an expression of absolute conviction. "Dad, you must marry her. You must marry someone who can glow in the dark." "Finn, I am merely stating priorities." By the conclusion of the fortnight, Silith had, in some inexplicable manner, become an integral presence. She aided Finn with his scientific coursework. Her grasp of stellar navigation proved remarkably beneficial for geography lessons. She acquired the fundamentals of moisture farming with the same systematic precision she applied to legal proceedings. She sat on the porch with Colton during the evenings, observing the binary sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, conversing about everything and nothing. In the span of those 2 weeks, amidst stolen interludes and growing comfort, a sentiment initially of gratitude blossomed into something far more profound. The night before her scheduled departure, under a sky so clear the stars seemed within reach, she declared, "I could petition for a permanent assignment within this sector." It represented a significant shift from her usual rotational duties, yet positions in administration and advisory capacities, with reduced travel, were indeed available. He observed, "That's quite the commitment for a farmer you've only known for 8 weeks, 7 weeks, and 4 days." Turning to face him, her eyes, a striking violet blue, shimmered in the dim light. "Yet, I feel as though I've known you much longer, ever since the moment you emerged from your vehicle during that storm, holding your hands up to show you meant no harm." A flicker of recognition crossed his features. "Something within me recognized something in Farthel?" he queried, recalling the term she had introduced him to. "Something akin to that," she confirmed, stepping closer. "Among my people, there's a belief that certain souls share an intrinsic bond across vast cosmic distances, that the universe orchestrates encounters between those destined to find each other. I always dismissed it as mere superstition, a fanciful narrative for romantic entertainment broadcasts. But now, here I stand, on a remote world I'd never even heard of 6 months ago, contemplating a complete overhaul of my career for a human with silver hair and an unfortunate talent for culinary disasters, and I find myself indifferent to whether it's fact or fiction." A subtle smile played on her lips. "Sometimes," she mused, "the most sensible course of action is to embrace the illogical." A genuine chuckle escaped him, a sound he hadn't realized he'd almost forgotten how to produce. "You know Finn is going to claim full credit for this. He's already convinced he's some sort of master matchmaker." He then produced a drawing. Silith's tone softened. "Did he show you?" "He presented it to me yesterday. It depicts a green-skinned woman holding a gavel, which he dubbed a magic hammer, standing beside a tall, gray-haired man, with a smaller figure between them labeled me." A peculiar sensation tightened in Colton's chest. "He desires a family," he stated, recalling Finn's longing since he was old enough to notice other children had mothers, and he did not. "What became of his mother?" "She departed when he was 2. She claimed this existence wasn't what she'd anticipated." He paused, a hint of weariness in his voice. "I don't fault her. Frontier farming is not for everyone, but I remained, built what I could, and endeavored to provide him with enough to compensate for what was absent. I never quite managed it. There's always something missing, yet one persists in trying regardless." Silith reached up, her cool, green fingers gently touching his face, tracing the curve of his jaw, the prominence of his cheekbone, and the fine lines etched around his eyes from countless dawns. "Nothing is missing anymore," she said softly. "That's precisely what I wish to convey, what I've been searching for the right words to express all evening. I don't feel adrift when I'm here. I feel as though my journey has concluded, and I've arrived at a destination I was always meant to reach. Under the vast expanse of stars, serenaded by the nocturnal symphony of insects and the distant hum of moisture collectors diligently working through the night," he kissed her. It was a sensation encompassing everything and nothing simultaneously, terrifying, inevitable, and impossibly, perfectly right. As they eventually drew apart, their breaths mingling, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he urged. "I was rather counting on it." Bren. 6 months later, the wedding took place in that same field where their first kiss had occurred. Widow Bertram, the caterer, ensured everyone received delectable food and an abundance of unsolicited life advice. Thomas Vega served as best man, managing to shed only 3 tears during the ceremony, which he attributed to allergies. Finn, standing beside his father, already managed to acquire a smudge of dirt on his suit while meticulously holding the rings with the intense focus of someone disarming a bomb. Do you, Colton Weatherby, take Silith Farandel to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold through ion storms and clear weather until the heat death of the universe? I do. Do you, Silith Farandel, take Colton Weatherby to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold through judicial proceedings and agricultural emergencies? I do, by the authority vested in me by the Valdris Sector Registry Office, and also because I obtained certification online last week, announced Widow Bertram, who had insisted on presiding. I now pronounce you married. You may kiss the bride, which I assume you've been doing already, because honestly, young people these days. The assembled guests erupted in cheers. Finn's excited cry about celebration and cake could be heard above the din. Somewhere, a band struck up a tune, likely intended to be romantic, but its slightly off-key melody lent it a charming rather than discordant quality. And Silith Farandel, now Silith Weatherby, though she retained her original surname for professional matters, gazed at the human who had halted his journey in a storm to assist a stranger, and a smile graced her lips. I suspect Finn is about to face-plant into the dessert table, she observed. He absolutely is. Should we intervene? Probably. Colton remained still. So did she. But I'm having a profound realization. And what might that be? The realization that the worst experience of my life directly led to the greatest joy I've ever known. He enfolded her in his arms, drawing her close. If Monantlair hadn't framed me, I would never have found myself in that courtroom. Had you not been stranded in that storm, you would never have glimpsed who I was before you encountered my official records. Every hardship brought us to this point. That's either deeply insightful or rather unsettling. A bit of both, I suspect, he replied, kissing her forehead. Come, let's go rescue the cake, before our son demolishes it. They walked hand in hand towards the festivities. The frontier farmer and the galactic arbiter, the human and the Farandelli, the 2 individuals who were never supposed to cross paths, yet somehow found themselves precisely where they belonged. Behind them, the sunset painted the sky with hues that defied description, and the first celestial bodies began to emerge from the deepening twilight. Somewhere out in the cosmos, a tempest was gathering on a distant world, and elsewhere, a traveler would make a choice, to stop or to continue their journey. But their narrative had concluded. 3 years later, Finn, now 12 years old and possessing an intellect far beyond his years, announced at breakfast, I have precisely calculated the probability of my parents' meeting. It's 0.00007%, he declared, crunching on his toast. I factored in storm frequency, the schedules for circuit judge rotations, statistics on propulsion converter failures, and the likelihood that Dad would actually stop instead of behaving like a typical self-centered individual. Thank you for that assessment, Colton remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. You are most welcome. In any case, 0.7%. You shouldn't exist as a couple. Silith looked up from her morning briefing documents. And yet, here we are. That's precisely my point. Finn leaned forward with the intensity of a child who has stumbled upon a significant discovery. If something so improbable can occur, then virtually anything is achievable. I could become a renowned explorer, invent something groundbreaking, or discover an entirely new species. The universe, you see, is simply a matter of statistics, plus chance, plus choices. That's remarkably philosophical for someone with jam on his chin, Colton observed. Finn wiped his face without a trace of embarrassment. I'm simply stating that you two have demonstrated something important. That positive outcomes eventually befall good individuals. That assisting strangers holds value. And that you should probably finish your breakfast and head to school before you miss the transport. Colton interjected, his voice laced with warmth. Fine. Finn grabbed his bag, moving towards the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Mom, Dr. Bertram asked me to remind you about the community council meeting this evening. Something concerning water rights arbitration? Mom. The word still resonated deep within Silith's chest every time he uttered it, even after 3 years. She had officially adopted Finn 18 months prior, but he had begun calling her Mom on their first anniversary, having decided then that this was her role, and no amount of formal terminology could alter his conviction. Inform Dr. Bertram I will be there, she replied. Now go and expand your knowledge. He was gone in a whirlwind of adolescent energy, leaving the kitchen suddenly hushed. Colton reached across the table and took her hand. 0.007%, he mused. Statistically improbable. Yet she smiled at him, her farmer, her husband, the man who had stopped in a storm when every logical reason dictated he should have driven on. And yet, she had agreed. Outside, the morning light gradually illuminated fields that had been part of the Weatherby lineage for 4 generations, and might now remain so for 4 more. The moisture collectors continued their ceaseless hum. In the distance, a transport ascended, carrying Finn towards his education and the future he so confidently anticipated. And within the kitchen of a farmhouse on a remote world, 2 souls who had found each other against overwhelming odds sat in contented quiet, hands clasped, needing nothing more than this singular moment. This was sufficient. This was everything. The conclusion.